So recently, we know from the news and stuff, we're involved in a conflict over in Iran. And over the Easter weekend, there was a pilot that was shot down and was basically in enemy territory for 3 days. He was severely injured and had to survive behind enemy lines, as we say. Being in the military, I know that there was times where we did some training and considering the idea that if you ever were captured, how you were to handle yourself and without compromising certain information, that you would give in order to be treated a certain way and not get hurt, but you are allowed. And so you learn how to understand that if I am captured, and it was a high possibility, how do you survive? Escape and evasion is something they teach those pilots, and it's extremely brutal. One time we did some training as the enemy against some Air Force pilots that they were doing a section of that training, and those instructors were brutal to those pilots. And I mean, those guys took some physical abuse and everything, and they learned. So when you hear about that, you miss a lot about how did that man survive in that environment. That's not the same what we're talking about, but it is. We talk about this morning how to live in a hostile world. We, in a lot of ways, are in enemy territory spiritually. One of the things that is fascinating to me is when you study history, you look at the church that the apostles built, and you look at that culture and the education and their views on different things. There's one thing that they all agreed with and that they understood very clearly, is that there's an evil world. There's a spiritual world. They had no problem with understanding that demons had possessed people because they saw Jesus throw them out. Jesus taught very strongly that there is another dimension besides the physical one in which we live in. And there is a war between good and evil. And you've heard that. We hear that. Yeah, there's a war, between good and evil. But it's very real. And Satan is their general. And he is doing everything he can to upset and to destroy anything that's good because he is so opposed to God. He is doing everything. You see, everything that God has created is perfect, and Satan hates it. That's why he does things in order to try to upset it. That's why he wants to destroy the innocents. That's why children are such a target of violence, because they're innocent. They're the purest they are, and they represent something that he hates, and that is God. And so he is doing everything he can to cause chaos, to get you to not believe in God and to pleasure yourself. And it's all about you. And it wasn't until the Renaissance period, if you look historically, that it all of a sudden radically changed. Around the 15th century, when the Renaissance, after the Dark Ages, after the plagues and such, there was a movement. And it was a good one, don't get me wrong. They just survived. Half of Europe, the modern world, died. People were dying by the hour. It was dark. It was horrible. And after that had gone on and it was over, they wanted to rejuvenate in art and sculpture and architecture and all sorts of things. And they wanted to go back to renewal, in other words, Renaissance, what they had before that period. So they looked at the Greeks. They looked at their art. They looked at their Socrates, Plato. They looked at some of those things and they wanted to renew that. But in doing that, then science comes along, and science is good. I am not against science. But what it did, it become opposed to theology. And science, and Satan's sitting there just, you can see him rubbing his chops going, here's another way that I can get and wedge in these humans against God. And so science became a new God. And it became the thing in which has caused so much, even to this day, you and I are living in a world that has been stripped Christians don't appreciate the idea and the depth of the spiritual war that is raging around us and the dangers of it. Now, if I tell you you're living in enemy lines, you're sitting there going, really? It's because you were born into a hostile environment. This is what Peter is trying to say. This is the people that were reading this letter had a different cultural background and understanding of that world, and they understood it. And so this is why when he's writing this, and he understands that they're fixing to go through some of the worst experiences they have ever experienced. And yet they're Christians. They're God, the powerful God of all things, the God who created everything, the God of love, the God of care, the God of protection. So what's going on? Why am I suffering? It's a good question, right? Now, I want to go back to my illustration about that American pilot. He's a pilot of one of the most powerful nations who's got the best equipment. He's got state of the art. That aircraft that they shot down should have never been able to be shot down, but it was, right? And he was behind enemy lines. And they just didn't come in and go, boop, pull him out. He could have been sitting there going, man, we've got total air dominance. We are powerful. We've blasted away everything. Why are they taking forever to come and get me? No, he knew how to survive. He knew what the situation was. And that's what Peter and what I'm trying to bring to you is this idea that we know how to survive in this world. And not just survive, but thrive. And whether these evil people and Satan realize this world is God's. And it is beautiful. In spite of their ugliness, creation is beautiful. And it's very precious. And so that's why I read that section before, because this is what he's trying to remind them of and to bring back to them this idea. First off, suffering is not new. And that's why I've said this over and over again in my lessons about Peter, is that he keeps bringing you where? What's the focal point? Go to the cross. Remember the picture of one who was so precious, one who was so innocent and so humble. And yes, like the prophet Isaiah said, was led like a lamb to his slaughter. Literally. Mocked, made fun of, ridiculed, bleeding, skin stripped off his body, and people making fun of him. And he is there to die for them. You want to talk about suffering? Go to the cross. Remember his whole life. He wasn't exactly the most popular among everybody. He was ridiculed by those who should have known better, right? Those who should have accepted him with open arms, the scholars, the scribes, the rabbis, should have said, Hosanna, Hosanna, you're here, were the very ones that attacked him. So when we think about what we're suffering, that's why Peter says it's important to remember that he did it first. But also, not just that, he beat it. He was victorious. In spite of the odds, he was victorious. And he is alive. And he is ruling. And his Father and him are in charge, not the evil around us. And that's hard to understand, though, sometimes. I think when we're suffering, when we're in the middle of suffering, you lose your focus, don't you? It's so easy to all of a sudden get dwelling on the pain of the immediate moment that we're experiencing it. And that's why it's important that whenever you get to those moments in your life, whenever you're suffering and you feel alone, I want the cross to pop up in your mind. I want you to remember what he did. But not just that bloody cross. I want you to remember that empty grave. I want you to remember that empty grave, because that is where we're at. He did the cross for us, didn't he? He emptied that grave for us. And we live because of him. So why are we afraid? Why do we get so depressed? Why are we sometimes walking spiritual martyrs, and not the happiest, easiest going? Because nothing should be affecting us. I know, I'm giving you the perfect picture. But that's kind of what he's saying here, is that you have something so glorious in a union with the Messiah that no matter what rages around you, it's insignificant. You are a winner. You are his saint. You are the elect. Now, in this journey, you're going to suffer. But through your suffering and the things in which we experience, he earlier said, there's something that should be happening. And the way that we're living, we should be showing the excellencies of God. In the middle of all of that, what happens? We reflect his character. We reflect his love, not the world's. We show the world our God through our character, like his son did for us when he came here. We are showing them God in the flesh through our behavior and our character. And that, though, is going to bring conflict. It's not going to make peace always. And that's why he kind of says the idea that, yes, let them be ashamed when they come at you. And yet you're doing the right thing. You've seen situations like that where people have been attacked and you know absolutely they're innocent. What are they doing? Where does the shame come? Not to the person that's being attacked, but it goes back to those that are out of control. And that has this powerful message. And so he's continuing that as we come into this next passage. And so as we flow through it, the basic map we see is he's going to talk about fiery trials. Now, he uses the word fiery on purpose. He could have just said trials. He could have just said bad times. He could have said it's just going to be ugly. But Peter picks that word on purpose. When you smelter metal, you purify it. Because in that process, what happens? The dross comes up to the top. It separates out. That heat does something to the element of metal. And it brings up the impurities on the top. And then you can knock that off. And you know what that does then? It makes that metal even stronger. So hold that. Fiery trials. So the trial is going to create you into this fiery environment. But then he's going to talk about the blessings and show us how powerful the blessings are. That we not only are gaining through ultimately salvation, but while this is happening. And that's why I say, depending on what you're focusing on, what are you looking at as these things are going on around you? Are you letting them drag you down? Then you're just like the world. The world doesn't have the same hope. They don't have that. And then he reminds, and this is a good one because sometimes we forget about the idea that the world is under a judgment as well. We look at those who are getting away with things, and what do we say? How long, oh Lord, is this going to keep going on? How long do people have to suffer this unrighteousness and this evil that's being inflicted on us? Not just us, but just society. Just look at the news. 13-year-olds getting shot in the head. 2 years ago, what happened here in Young Park? Some of the things we could go on and on about. And I cry out and I'm like, when is this going to stop? Not just for me, but for the innocent that are out there. There's a judgment. But don't worry about it. They're not getting away with it. We think they are. They may think they are. They're not getting away with it. And so he ends it, this section, by entrustment, entrusting him. So let's jump in and look at verses 12, chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Beloved, do not be surprised by the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share in Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Don't be surprised, he says, right? Don't be surprised. Sometimes we're shocked. We are. Where'd that come from? Now, when I'm talking about suffering and the spiritual suffering, there's physical suffering that we're all getting older. I don't know about you. If you're young, it's coming, right? Old people are always reminding of you of that. There's no golden ages. I heard that growing up. There's nothing golden about the golden years. No, it's not. Arthritis comes in. You start getting a little fatter. Your hair turns gray. Your hair falls out. Vision gets dimmer. Doctor keeps telling you certain things you got to get done because we know that. There's a part of that that's just there all the time, no matter who you are, no matter what. I'm talking spiritual. I'm talking about the spiritual idea that sometimes when we are serving and we are truly doing the right thing, sometimes we confuse that line. Sometimes, whenever we're suffering certain things, and he's going to talk about that, I kind of brought it on myself. Maybe I did something that was truly wrong. Don't confuse the idea that, suffering when you're right from suffering when maybe you're wrong. He's going to talk about that. But the idea is that, sometimes it is shocking that you are doing the right thing at work, at school, with your friends, and all of a sudden they turn on you. I've had that happen to, over the years where I'll be talking to my mom on the phone one time and some lady is talking about how prejudiced Ron was. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? And you know what happened though? Now, I sound like I'm bragging, but this is what happened. My mom said, you could say that about any of my kids, but not Ron. But I was so appalled that somebody could lay that accusation on me like that. Where'd that come from, But you know what? It tested. Because when even your mother, and of course, I know moms are on your side, but those little things, and I could go through them, and I bet you could too, where'd that insult or that accusation come from? And so it tests you. And some of them are far worse, more involved. I'm giving kind of a simple, illustration of it, but a lot of times there are things that we look at. But when you are living for Christ, then that's what he's talking about. Because when he says suffering for Christ, I want you to also remember the time when Stephen was being stoned in the book of Acts. Why I want you to do that historically? I like anchor points in my memory that help me trigger certain things when I'm experiencing things. That's why I said when you're suffering, cross, empty grave. But another one is when I think of Stephen, he's called both in Acts. But one of the things is he stands up and he gives one of the most amazing, beautiful testimonies. And he is reviled. The crowd goes nuts. And they start seething at their teeth. And they finally get to the point where they rip their clothes and they're screaming at him. And then they pick up stones and they hand their coats to a man named Saul. And they start killing him, pounding him, rock by rock by rock, pounding on him. And he looked up and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Wasn't a quick execution, okay? Let's just say that. They didn't walk up and put a dagger in his heart and he died. It was pounding, rock by rock, attacking him. And in that moment, I don't know that I could have done that. I think of that. But there's more here in this story. Because while he was saying that and looking up, what did he see? What did he see? He saw the Lord standing there next to the throne. Jesus was looking down on him. He wasn't sitting like a normal king would sit while people come up before him. He was standing, looking, because he was Stephen's. Stephen was his. What they were doing to him, they were doing to the Lord. What the world does to you, they are doing to the Lord. You may not see the heavens open up and see the Lord standing there, but I'm telling you, he's there. He has felt the same pain. That's why you need to think of the cross. And there's no one better to know the shame and suffering of this world than our Lord Jesus Christ. Right? So I'm asking you, why are we afraid? You almost want to say, bring it on. You got to watch the arrogance there. But I mean, there's a part where we should be that way. If we're living for Christ, it's not a life of perfection, okay? It's not perfection. You're going to stumble. The Lord knows that. That's why he died once and for all, and he doesn't have to keep suffering for it. John tells us, if you think you're not a sinner, you're lying. But he says, you have a heart that will, once you know you've done something wrong, that you turn to him. And what does he say in there in 1 John chapter 1, verse 7 through 9? He says, the blood of Christ will cleanse you. It's not like there's a tub up there and you get reblooded, but it's spiritually. That's where we're at, you see. Not in perfection, but in a relationship that is such, that has the heart, that is willing to understand that when I stumble, I turn and humbly change. And that keeps me in a right relationship with him. And so when we have these things, coming back to this suffering, it does seem strange, but don't. He says, don't think it's a strange thing. He says there are things that these are going to happen to you that are going to make you a better person. I had a man tell me that when my father was killed when I was 19 years old. He looked at me and said, "And the day your dad died, you became a man." And I thought to myself, I don't want to be a man. I want my dad. Right? I got time to be a man. Why did God take my dad? I had friends who hated their dads, who had terrible relationships with their dad. And I was a Christian and I could not understand it. Why did God do that to me? Why? And I'll tell you, I failed. I lost my faith. But that made me stronger. It was the fire that I went through that took some of those impurities out of my soul that the Lord removed. And every time I go through those, more of those impurities come out through that fiery trial and make me stronger and stronger. And I'm not going to be there yet until I get to heaven. But man, what the Lord has done for me has been amazing. And what he's doing for you, I'm telling you, whether you realize it or not, is amazing. So Peter says, expect it, right? Don't be surprised. And in a lot of ways, if you are truly living as spiritually honest before God, you're actually sharing in that same thing he went through. Isn't that the least we could do? I mean, that's what he went through. Now, what is ironic is in the first century, some Christians took that to an extreme. Believe it or not. They wanted to be martyred. They would almost go out and provoke their death. Did you know that? They thought that if they died for Christ, literally, that they had the most righteous death would be to die on a cross. You know, I need to die. I need to suffer. And they were writing like, tone it down. You don't go out and make it happen. Don't some Christians do that today? Maybe they're not wanting to die on a cross and stuff, but sometimes, we think that and we like aggravate the situation. You notice that passage when I read this morning, you maybe not remember it, but one of the things he said, that while we're defending our faith, what does he say? What's the attitude? Humbly, gently, not with arrogance. There's a way we can show the excellencies of Christ in a hostile environment that will be far more devastating to the world, and that is through our humility. That's what Christ did, right? That's what Christ did. And that's why we see the glory is revealed in that suffering for righteousness. 14. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. Now I want to stop, little side road or rabbit chase. Look at what he says, don't suffer as. Murder, that's a pretty bad one, right? Thief, that's bad. Evildoer, okay, that's a little bigger picture, not so specific. Meddler, ooh, where'd that come from? What's a meddler? You could get it, you could say, I'm on that murder stuff. Yeah, don't be a murderer. Don't be a thief. Don't be an evildoer. But then it got real soft, didn't it? Meddler, who hasn't meddled? Come on. You don't have to, but right? What is meddling? Let's talk about that for just a moment. It's getting into somebody's business that you don't belong there or have the authority or the business to do. Now, that's a fine line sometimes, right? And sometimes that's the problem with meddling. Getting to get involved or, inquire and then insert yourself into a situation that you have nothing to do with, but you feel like you need to know about it or you want to give some advice about it, right? What's so bad about that? Well, I'll tell you what, he just put it in the same classes, evildoers, thieves, and murderers. So let's just say meddling is destructive. Okay. Yet if you do suffer, don't be ashamed. Sometimes the ridicule and the things that we suffer are not like, a mob with torches, coming after us. Sometimes it's off the cuff comments at the time clock when you're leaving work, like what happened to me. Sometimes it's just standing in a group and somehow they'll highlight that you're different because you're a Christian. You don't have those values. And then you have a lot of those things. The world will shame us. Now, let's go back to what I hammered on earlier. What's the source of this? This is because of the evil and the good war that is raging in the cosmological world that is dwelling around us that we don't see visually. It's there. And so we are living not only in a culturally physical world that is representing good and evil through people. We're proxies, in other words, in a lot of ways. You know how government, like Russia, used to use other countries to fight America, and America would pay other countries to fight, but they wouldn't go directly against Russia or America because that might make a nuclear war. That's kind of what's happening here in this physical world. I don't like the idea of equating Christians as proxies, but we're fighting in a sense against those that are fighting against us, the evil, the sin. And I'm telling you, this past 8 years, it's been raging in America. I have never seen so many words in the dictionary about morality that used to be so vile that has become good. Things that used to turn people's stomach and say, that is so sick and twisted. And now if you say that same thing about that word or that attitude or that lifestyle, you're the evil one. Right? That is because of the war we're involved spiritually, right? The other beautiful part is what I've kind of been saying when he says the Spirit of glory and of God. Remember I said about Stephen when he looked down and he saw Stephen? Guess what was on him? You know, that's another thing that I kind of forgot about. You know what they saw? What did they see when they looked at him? They saw his face as an angel. They saw him change. They saw something different. And I'm not saying that's what it is, but this is the idea that he's trying to say. You're not a lone spirit in this world. God's Spirit and the Spirit of glory is with you while this happens. And that is nice. That is beautiful to think about. And in that, when you're standing up and saying evil's bad, when you stand up and you say, and I'm saying it with a real harsh voice, but when I say, I'm sorry, but marriage is between a male and a female, and those are the only two sexes. 5 years ago, I would have never thought that would have been such a vile statement I just made to people. But today, people would rage against me. And because we're a small YouTube channel, we don't get nailed as much. We never really have. And people have asked me, are you afraid to say stuff like that? That you're against homosexuality and transgender? And I said, no, I'm not. Strike us. Because you know what you do when you do that? They're proving my point. They're proving our point, aren't they? Because it's the war that's going on. And it's proving, when they do that to us like that, they're showing us, if anything, we are a part of Christ, if anything. Remember, have some sensibleness about you when you're thinking about your suffering. You didn't get that ticket because you're a Christian, okay? And the cop is evil. Because you have a bumper sticker on that says he lives. And he pulled you over and gave you a ticket. So therefore, you can stand proud before the judge and say, it's because I'm a Christian he pulled me over. No. Now that's a little bit of a silly thing, and I know, but sometimes we can blur that line. And that's what Peter's just saying. There are some things you're going to suffer because you were just dumb. You were wrong, because we're not perfect. I do speed. We all kind of, we break some laws, But every time you break a law and you suffer from it, don't throw that on Christ. Okay? That's yours. Own it. What he's talking about is you're doing the right thing, and then you suffer, okay? And then he brings in judgment. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. For if it'll begin with us, what will become and what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? I found it fascinating. He could have just skipped and said, you know what? There's a judgment coming. Everybody's going to be judged. That's where you just need to kind of remember justice is coming. So what he just said earlier was he reminded them that suffering is going to be because of bad things. But he also said, understand there's a difference between whenever you're doing things that are wrong to begin with versus when you're suffering because you're doing the right thing with Christ. But everything is under a judgment, right? There is a judgment that's coming, and we get that. But one of the things he does, he kind of starts with us. He says what? He refines his own people. God looks at his people. He has a higher standard for us. He expects more of us, just like, at your job. Your boss holds you to a higher level of accountability than somebody they just hired that's just learning the job, right? Because why? You should know better. He holds us there. And so there's a difference. But he says, and if it's hard, and if we're going to go through that, what do you think is going to happen to those who don't obey the gospel? Those who are in sin themselves, right? So the outcome is a fearful thing, especially for them. So we're going to be refined and we're going to be held accountable, but don't forget, the ending part of this is saying, don't forget, they are not getting away with this at all. So the outcome of them shows us from in the house of God, salvation is a serious thing. Don't just go, well, I feel sorry for them. No, worry about yourself. It's kind of like focus on yourself. This comes from Proverbs 11, verse 31. That's what I thought was so interesting. Proverbs 11:31 says, if the righteous is repaid on earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? And that's what he's using. It's the idea that we're held accountable, but don't forget, they're not getting away with it. It's going to be even harsher on them as well. Verse 19, therefore, because of everything we just said, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. He didn't say your physical body. Notice that? Because he knows that's going to go away. You know that. Your body's going to die, but your soul's not. What did Paul say about who to worry about when it comes to this idea of soul and body? I know some of you know what I'm talking about. But it's the same thing when Paul says there, don't worry about the person who can destroy your body. Worry about the one who can destroy both body and soul. Because the soul is the one thing that you have that is going to go on beyond into eternity forever and ever. So that's why, put it into perspective, right? It's a powerful message and it's hard. But one of the things we have to remember is that no matter who we are, we need God's forgiveness. We need to have an understanding how to focus our soul and our life in this world. We are all held accountable. And so when we think about it this morning, before we wrap all this up, how are you walking with the Lord? And when I mean that, I don't mean like, how many paces are you taking? I'm talking about how are you living? Are you living with the Lord? Or are you living against the Lord? There's no middle ground. We're either with him or we're against him. If you're with him, now that's like he said, if he's going to start with the household first, that's where we need to think about it as Christians. Well, how are we living? And that's why we have this invitation song every Sunday. It's not to shut Ron up so you can get to Burger King, or go eat. It's because it's that important to always evaluate how I'm living before God. And as a Christian, we need to be honest and humble. If you're not a Christian, you're against him. You're under a judgment. And you don't have the blood of Christ. He has done everything he can except drag you into water and dunk you himself. And he won't do that. You have to make that choice. And when you come to that understanding, one of the things that is spontaneous, it's almost is exactly the way it happened on the day of Pentecost. When they came to that understanding, their hearts cried out, "What do we do?" And I'm going to tell you this morning as well, if you're not a Christian, what you need to do when your heart's ready. Repent and be baptized, each one of you, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, in order to receive forgiveness of sin. I know I kind of paraphrase that, but go there. Go to Acts chapter 2, 37 through 38. That's what a heart that is ready to submit and come to the Lord. If there's anybody else that we can help you with your relationship or prayers or anything and you're comfortable, come forward while we stand and sing.